All right, thank you all for coming today. I'd like to start out presentations with a little introduction from the audience. So let's do names and maybe why you're here today. So my name is Dylan. I am here to present on DeGrowth 101. Anyone want to go around? Karen?
Yeah, and I'm Karen Lemke. Hello, Lynn. And I'm here to kind of talk about maybe a little bit of the context in the Milwaukee Rivershed. And we have Lynn online. Are you able to say hello, Lynn? And then I'll meet you afterwards.
Yeah, I can say hello. I met Kuumba. I
Oh,
was there with in person. So am I wrong on that?
Yeah, you are right. If we are, oh, I can see. I can see you.
Oh, there you are. All right. Sorry, I've never been here before. I guess I'll.
It's also new to the Milwaukee.
Okay, this is Meta. Okay.
Awesome. So Linda's here. Anybody else want to say hello? And
I'm Sarah. I just moved to Milwaukee 2 weeks ago from Mountain. Hello.
Awesome. Well,
I'm Virginia, and I have been hearing about this from Karen, and I wanted to check it out, even though I am on one of the program on trees to go through it. Janet and Karen is my sister, and I just care a lot about the environment and socioeconomic inequity, and so I'm here to learn.
My name is Eric. I write a Substack blog called The Regenerative Transition. So I've studied DeGrowth too, of course.
so we heard from Lynn and
My name is Bridget. I live in Scotland, and here I followed the design school for generating work with Jared, and on my way to see my daughter now, Albert. So here I am in Milwaukee to learn more about the growth and enjoy Milwaukee.
yeah, and we've been to South Shore Park and we went to the Haven Woods yesterday and we've done a bunch of walks and talks. It's been a good visit. So thank you.
and also welcome everyone. So starting off, I'll talk a little bit more about myself with a little bit of unconventional introduction here. So this here is a message from my great grandfather. I was going through old family documents with my mom, and she found this little postcard, which I found very interesting and connected to a lot of the things that I've been trying to learn about lately. So I'll just kind of quickly read it out loud. We are always talking about the pioneers and what great folks the pioneers were. Let's look history in the face. A pioneer was nothing but a fellow that wanted something for nothing. That's about all he was. He wanted to cut a tree down because it didn't cost him nothing, but he never did plant one, you know. He wanted to plow up the land that should have been left to grass. We're just now learning that we can rob from nature the same as we can rob from an individual. All he had was an axe, a plow, and a gun. He just went out and lived off of nature. Well, he thought it was nature he was living off of, but it was really future generation. So I thought that was kind of cool. I was like, okay, he was probably a little ahead of the times. But talking a little bit about my family history, I'm from Chicago, but most of my family's history over the past 200 years has been in Indiana. I descend from settler colonists, people whose narcissism convinced them that the land belonged to them at the expense of the people who were indigenous to it. My family participated in genocide against the Miami, Potawatomi, Lenape, and Shawnee in the region. But I also descended from hippies and tree huggers who challenged themselves to challenge a lot of the conventional wisdom of the time. So my interest in degrowth stems from my interest in trying to continue this tradition of my family and asking these big questions that look into our history and seek to find a better path forward. So yeah, I invite you all to kind of accept what I think is my great grandfather's invitation here, and thinking about what does progress really mean, and kind of what do we want the world to look like. Okay, so I like to also start off by kind of asking people what they're working on a little bit. So we already did a couple of introductions, but if people have projects that they want to share, or they have events coming up that we'd like to talk about, please feel free to take the floor.
I'm trying to have it for, a decade, trying to keep track of how much we're maintaining the public realm for the public, and how much is being cited away, in one form or another. So, and that was anything that's either a park or a public space or land that is publicly owned. So that's. And then it says, and to tie it in with that, those commons are so valuable, but people are always looking at that as maybe being more valuable as a developed property or something, or a private interest, kind of taking it on, taking these property theirs.
Awesome, thank you for sharing. Sounds like awesome. Anyone else for events or? Oh, get pointed to? Something going up.
So, that I'm working on. So I had an opportunity to sit on the board of the local League of Women Voters College by that. And so I am working on trying to move the needle with them. It's an awesome legacy organization. It's over 100 years old, focused on strengthening democracy and empowering voters. And we have a lot of people who are very dedicated to like climate action and protecting natural resources. And I would love to move them in a direction of DeGrowth. No disrespect to the women I work with, they're incredibly accomplished, but also kind of some old-fashioned ideas about how, I don't know. I think not progressive enough in terms of like saving the environment or climate catastrophe. So that's what I'm working with, is trying to move the needle in the league and get people to care more about DeGrowth.
Yeah, awesome project.
Yeah, thanks. Anyone else?
The Girl Scouts.
I also volunteer with the local Girl Scout troop.
Ooh, awesome. My sister is a Girl Scout.
And like connecting together.
I guess I'll talk. As I mentioned, I write a Substack blog. It's called the Regenerative Translation. Actually, I'm just changing right now to that. One of the themes in it is, what would it look like for people everywhere making decisions that scale back the things that we take from the biosphere and scale back the pollution that we put into the biosphere? So that's degrowing those flows and things out of the biosphere and the pollution that we're putting into the biosphere.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I'll have to check out your Substack. All right, we had one person walk in late. Would you like to introduce yourself to the group?
Greatest. I took a permaculture design course with the regenerative school for regenerating earth, with Karen last winter. And I'm going to keep going with those two skills I learned, and also the skills that I had. I did grow some pumpkins this year, so that's the first time. Didn't know you had to pollinate them, so next year we got them. It's nice to meet you.
That's exciting. And then you two, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Well, I'm also not sure exactly what you want to know. My name is Kuumba, and I work in the local area locally, but I've also worked a lot nationally with school food supply things and the farm school stuff like that.
Awesome. I'm Marley Finnegan. I have a small business called Purpose. Has focused on sustainable event strategy, supporting food system innovation and tourism, and rerouting surplus event food to local communities is my goal. And I have been at DGI. I was at the DeGrowth opening in Chicago.
Oh,
I supported John and Steve for a little bit, so I'm really interested in DeGrowth and social.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you guys for sharing. So yeah, we're just kind of sharing any like events or projects that people are working on that they want to share with the group. So Karen, I know that you have lots of stuff coming up that.
Yeah, well, the big thing I wanted to talk about is the next event in this kind of monthly series, which is November 15th. It's a Saturday morning. It'll be in the same room. And there's a group of people who have been developing a role-playing game, a climate solutions role-playing game, using the 9 planetary thresholds. And Dylan's going to talk more about what we mean by that. But in terms of degrowth, we're trying to get back within our, consuming less and being within our planetary thresholds. And this game takes those 9 planetary thresholds, which include things like microplastics and CO2 in the atmosphere, and it looks at it the Milwaukee context. What's the scorecard for Milwaukee? And the gameplay is to develop your character to go on a quest to do something that gets us back within the planetary thresholds. And so the gameplay, we're introducing the gameplay on November 15th. It's a Saturday morning. And then mid-December, we'll have kind of a, how's your plan going? And in the new year, I'm planning to flow funding and mobilize resources so that if there's, I don't know what their solutions are going to be, but if it's like a community garden or whatever it's going to be, what resources do you need to be successful? We do that. So that's the gameplay, and that's kind of the main thing I wanted to make sure I talked today.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that'll be a lot of fun. Does anyone else want to share anything before we start digging into DeGrowth? All right. We'll kind of have that at that. Okay, so we'll start out with the definition of degrowth, and sorry, this mouse is a total mess. So yeah, we'll start out with a definition from the DeGrowth Institute. So degrowth is an intentional downscaling of the global economy for the purpose of achieving ecological sustainability and social justice. That's the definition that the DeGrowth Institute, based out in Chicago, has been workshopping for quite some time. I think it's kind of like a good broad definition of the kind of concepts that we are talking about here. So to start out, I invite you guys to kind of dig into this definition a little bit and kind of discuss your initial reactions to it with the people next to you. And then I have some discussion questions to kind of get you kicked off. So just like thinking beyond initial reactions, thinking about why do you think degrowth calls for an intentional downscaling? Do you agree with the premise that an intentional downscaling is necessary? Should the pursuit of ecological sustainability and social justice be related goals? Why might sustainability movements and justice movements be disconnected in their current form? And I think a lot of you are probably familiar with a lot of these questions. I didn't know how familiar people would be with degrowth, but just thinking about like your reactions to this definition, if you think that there's anything missing from it, or if you think it tells the picture of what you think degrowth means to you. So feel free to kind of like take a few minutes, talk to your neighbors, people at your table about what you think.
One week, I saw 5 movies. So I the Gravers, movies and everything. She said.
Like, I'll give like 5 minutes for them to kind of do that, and then kind of keep chugging along.
Yeah, I'm gonna pause.
It's a global economy.
Yep, that makes sense. Back in. You guys, is everyone on the inside kind of bring it back? All right, clap once if you can hear me. Clap twice if you can hear me. Clap 3 times if you can hear me. Okay, awesome. All right, so kind of bring it back together as a group. The fact that it was difficult to pull you guys from the conversations is very encouraging, because it means we're having good conversations. So what were people talking about? But what do you want to share with the group? Oh, come on, there was so much.
I'll go. I mean, the word economy or global economy is such a. It's a couple words for saying something really vast, and it's really hard to, get one's mind around what is it. At least that's the question I ask myself.
Yeah, that's a great question. What did your group have kind of insight into that, or is that?
There was lots of things we said.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want us to recap everything, but, we just talked about how perhaps what the level of change needs to be much more local, more fractal and more bioregional, rather than really thinking about this massive global system.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's
And
pick
we
it up.
talked about sustainability being, is that sustaining what, are we at the level where we're at and perhaps more wanting to be regenerative than just sustaining?
Yeah. I know Sarah and I kind of talked about like tech waste, we kind of got to that focus, and then how I noticed they're doing like a tech waste coordinator for the city now, but really how like every city kind of needs their own office for this. Like not one nonprofit that we have, I forgot the name of the organization, that they do tech waste recycling and refurbishing, but it needs to be something we think about more. And then it even gets to the point like, why is AI and our tech using rare earth minerals and tons of water? I feel like there could be another way. In the 1960s, someone created a whole car that ran on water. Now there's like conspiracy theories with all that now. I don't think it's true here, but like I was saying, the human mind has enough creativity and we have enough resources that we don't need to extrapolate the deepest rare earth minerals. We don't need to use all the water for AI. They're just like they just thought of the simplest way to get to these technological places. When if there are I don't know if there is life out there, they clearly are harnessing energy in a different way. And okay, anyway, that's another conversation.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, we're picking the simplest ways to get this tech, but really, there could be way better ways without like just destroying our resources. That's
Yeah.
what we kind of got into, I feel like.
Yeah, that's a great discussion, thinking about kind of the kinds of creativity that a better system would produce. At a time where like we're ready to like mine the deep sea floor to get more of those rare earth minerals, because like we think that we need them for whatever reason, but maybe we don't. And I love this idea of maybe the word sustainability isn't the right word, and we should be building towards things that are more regenerative. I think that implies kind of an economy that's more exciting, and I think regenerative ties you more to the functions of ecology too, and the ways that ecosystems tend to operate and come back stronger and build up nutrients in the soil and all of that. So I love that insight. What did this group talk about?
We kind of started off thinking about how we've met our renewable energy growth goals many times over, but it can never catch up to the exponential growthism of the 3% growing economy every year. And so just that idea that the investment of even the IRA and a lot of this funding has gone to this, extracted resource growth because of the finances involved versus being invested in local food systems or food systems innovation. And just then we kind of like went to the importance of hyperlocalization of food systems investment, in terms of resilience and ecological relationship. And just observing sort of how even with renewables, it has been the same growthism path, and that we really can't catch up with the AI growth and all of that. And so what is sufficient to our livelihood and our flourishing versus like our conveniences?
Yeah, I love the focus on agriculture. I think it's something that a lot of kind of like the mainstream political points can't grapple with, because what we need to be able to achieve drawdown or drawing carbon down into these radically different systems. It seems like no one's ready to say that. So I think that's another cool element of degrowth, is that it gives us the space to rethink those sorts of things. But yeah, anyone else have things to share that they think are kind of important or interesting before we start moving on? All right. Oh.
So here's my idea, it's not time to be taken to Milwaukee County Parks, that the within our domes should be turned into giant greenhouses. Okay, the whole city.
We're gonna take a few tropical trees and like see how we can.
Well, they've got banana trees in there.
Yeah.
So like, just to make it more food plants and like decorative plants, and there you go, now there's no more food insecurity in Milwaukee. So.
Could you say more about what that is, because I just got.
Right, sorry, we're not from Milwaukee, the Mission Park domes they're like huge glass domes they're kind of a tourist attraction right now. There's like a jungle dome, and a desert dome that's super humid, and they've got banana trees and tropical plants, and then you go to the next one, and it's arid, and there's giant campuses, and it's a great educational experience for local school children to learn about different climates and everything, but like it's one of those situations where there's deferred maintenance and budget troubles and decades later, we haven't fixed it the way the engineer said we should, and now it's to the point where do we have enough money to fix it and save it, or should we just demolish it? And I just, every survey the Milwaukee County Park Service has sent out, I replied with, why don't you just make them into greenhouses? Because then we won't have to spend any money on feeding hungry people in the city.
Kind of like the Garfield Conservatory or in Chicago, or the one that they have in Madison. But it's like
That's
with three different biospheres.
Yeah, they're cute, and they're like 50+ years old, so we have the technology to build these giant dome-shaped greenhouses, and then we obviously still have it now, and we can.
Subsidies to build a greenhouse around your existing house, save on heat, those.
I'm trying to convince my spouse of that.
Yeah, I was grand,
So no giant greenhouse in the backyard. Except for the Milwaukee County Park Service.
Okay, Portman.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, any opportunity to kind of connect what we're talking about here to our regional context, that's really important. That's gonna be a big goal for today.
This might be slightly random off topic, but I drove from Virginia to here, and the amount of cornfields I passed was astounding. It was incredible. I was just like, where is all this corn going? What is it being used for? I mean, that's what I think. That's horrifying.
I actually did a road trip down to Missouri, and I did see a lot of corn being harvested, but I didn't see any soybeans. They were all dying because the problem right now for farmers is that China usually buys about $6 billion worth of soybeans every year, and they bought $0, and we actually gave Argentina money that we should bring every to our American farmers. And now that I love the cash crops, but that's like what they're tied into now. So like our farmers were really struggling.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful like for our produce farmers who see at the market, because at least they kind of have their own autonomy a little bit. outside the season.
I mean, that's what's going on, this is just people making money, like your great grandfather said, just
Also,
making money off the
that
land.
kind of, I have animals, I wouldn't want to eat that either.
Yeah.
I mean, we eat grass, that's
Exactly.
the rumen.
Yeah. Okay,
So that's from being
just
sick.
a reaction from my experience.
Yeah. Yeah, but I will say just quickly on agriculture too, it's important to consider with farmers too, that they're totally screwed by big agriculture
Yes.
corporation, because if you try and make something that's not a monoculture, but your neighbor sprays a bunch of chemicals on their crops, those are gonna come right over to your fields.
Maybe this will be a good wake up call this horrible season for them, maybe they will switch off to more, like, food for human consumption.
Yeah.
And using less pesticides and, I hate RFK Junior, but maybe that's something he could advocate for is less pesticides on. So.
Yeah, that does tend to be how it happens, is like there's the bad few years of crops or a bad series of droughts, and farmers are forced to start looking for alternative.
Yeah.
So there's always opportunity in this sort of crisis. That'll be another. Yeah. Okay. All right. So the next few slides are going to be kind of a lot of me talking. So if you have any questions at any point, or you have any thoughts, please feel free to raise your hand or just interrupt or share your thoughts. I love for these sorts of things to be kind of as fluid as possible. So when you hear a politician, journalist, or economist celebrate a 3% increase in growth, it is important to understand that takes place on an exponential scale. So here we have a graph that shows GDP over the long run. So it's like literally starting at the year like 1 and then going up to now. We can see kind of how much the economy has truly ballooned over time, where it is growing rapidly, and it is growing at a pace faster than it has ever at any point in human history, with most of this growth happening over the past 100 years or so. The kind of fun fact I'd like to share about exponential growth is that if the economy were to grow by 3% every year, which most economists agree is a healthy rate of growth, then the size of the economy will double every 24 years, which is kind of crazy to think about. Like this line is only going like way up, right? And on its surface, we may wonder kind of what is the problem like with that. It's just money. Not all money is necessarily tied to environmental harm. But I would argue that it actually is. So here we're going to talk about a little bit about economic pseudoscience. And that mainstream economics has proven itself to be an ineffective tool for achieving ecological progress. So on the left, we have an environmental Kuznets curve, which demonstrates a theoretical relationship between economic growth and environmental degradation. The idea is that as the economy grows, there will be environmental degradation until basic needs are met. Then there is a turning point. The economy is post-industrial. Growth comes from services more than goods, and can continue without causing more harm to the planet. So the Kuznets curve here tells a nice story. The issue is that it is completely made up. There is no empirical evidence to back the validity of this curve, and we can look to the graph to your right to kind of get a better understanding of what's going on in reality. It shows the rate of the world's material footprint and how that relates to increases in population and GDP growth over time. It shows that increases in GDP are always and have always been correlated with an increase in the amount of material we extract from the earth. There is no turning point where it gets better. There is an ever-increasing standard of living that drives further material extraction. Environmental exploitation is actually a key driver of growth in our current system. And remember, this is happening on an exponential scale. So that 3% annual growth that we say is very healthy is tied to this material extraction. So that means every 24 years, if our economy is growing in a way that we consider to be good, we are using more than double the amount of materials that we were 24 years ago. Someone, did I hear something? Okay. So.
I wanted to say, like, I just did Project Drawdown, came up with this new quiz to sort of help. It's almost like a gamification of environmental education. But what I found astonishing was, if you make $38,000, you're within the top 10% of global earners, and that's directly associated with an emissions per person. And so, but that's like even mapping just financial earnings to environmental footprint and how that extrapolates all the way up to the 1% and the massive amount of emissions. That cohort, it seems like there's the symbiosis in those two things, right?
Yeah. Thank you for contributing.
Yeah.
So yeah, kind of with this, the good news is that it does not have to be this way. We don't have to have a material footprint tied to kind of the progress of our economy. So a study by Jason Hickel and Dylan Sullivan demonstrates that we could provide a good standard of living for all with just 30% of our global material and energy usage. So a good standard of living that includes housing, year-round thermal comforts, nutritious food, access to water, healthcare, education, a phone, a computer, and access to transportation. And that's just the floor. That also leaves an abundant amount of energy that we would be able to produce to create better spaces for social recreation, opportunities for human art and creativity, and the advancement of science can all take place while using less energy. So we can become kind of much more efficient and thoughtful about how we use these sorts of things. All right. And so not only are we using too much energy and material, the manner in which they are extracted is inherently unjust. So here I have the Wallerstein World System Theory model, which demonstrates how rich nations in the core dominate poor nations in the periphery. So through debt traps, military threat, political assassinations, and propaganda, the core drives growth at the expense of the periphery. So this is kind of a broad overview of the nature of those relationships, where the core is able to receive cheap labor and raw materials, where they have these strong institutions and businesses that turn those into high profit consumption goods that they kind of sell to the rest of the world. So the idea being the core dominates the semi-periphery and the periphery, and there are some nations that have been slightly successful at growing, and they belong in the semi-periphery, and they are able to dominate nations in the periphery. So the kind of important thing to understand here is that rich countries are rich because poor countries are poor. So if one driver of growth is environmental exploitation, then another is exploitation of the poor via imperialism. This is why economic growth can never be a true solution for solving global poverty. If nations in the periphery grow the same way those in the core do, then they will depend on the exploitation of someone else for their success. This is not to say that nations in the periphery should not grow. They should be allowed to provide for their people with a good standard of living, and that will require expanding energy and resource use. What it does mean is that their growth should be needs-based and that they should be allowed independence from the core's exploitative nature of extraction. So a lot of degrowthers have changed how they talk about the relationship between kind of the global north and global south, or the core and the periphery, saying that poor countries should be focused on degrowing, while countries in the periphery should be focused on post-growth. So that's kind of a separation from this process of exploitative growth and being able to have sovereignty in their own self-determination. And then, of course, the consequence of our immense resource and energy use outside of the obvious kind of human rights violations is overshoot. So overshoot is what happens when we use more resources than the earth can regenerate and more waste than its cycles can handle. So the effects of overshoot are best illustrated in the Stockholm Resilience Center's planetary boundaries framework. So this framework displays 9 interconnected processes that are key to maintaining a stable planet. When a process's boundary is crossed, then there is critical risk of irreversible environmental harm. Human activity has caused us to transgress 7 of the 9 boundaries so far, which is kind of a scary thing to think about. They developed this framework in 2009, and in 2009 we'd only crossed like 2 of the boundaries. Now we're at a point where we've crossed 7 of them. Is that we have a hand up or?
No, I just took a picture, thanks.
Okay. So this is kind of just like scary stuff to think about. But I think kind of the key takeaway is that we're not just talking about climate change. That is kind of like the kind of like ultimate system that processes our waste. So it is kind of one of the more important impacts, but it's also interconnected to all of these other planetary boundaries as well. So the most recent boundary that was transgressed, for example, is ocean acidification. So what happens is we release all of that carbon up into the air. 90% of that is absorbed into the oceans, making oceans more acidic and threatening ocean.
Bleaching all the coral reefs, which are habitats.
Yep. And yeah, then temperature, of course, also affects that. And we can start to see how when we kind of take one cycle and kind of prevent it from working in the earth, we can prevent all these other cycles from working as well. So the problem can't just be an energy transition, or the solution can't just be an energy transition where we solve climate change. The solution has to address the issue of overshoot, being able to live more sustainably or more regeneratively, as we talked about earlier. Okay.
Can I ask?
Yes.
I think I really know what novel entities mean. Does anyone know that?
I can talk a little, would you mind going to the slide
yes.
before? What that Stockholm image represents to me is like a multidisciplinary, different disciplines saying, well, we're having crisis here and we're also having crisis here, and gives more of that big picture. And I'm not the science, I don't know all of the science, but I knew that novel entities includes like microplastics. It's a new threat that we didn't even have a name for before a few, even in 2009, I don't think novel entities was included there. The radiative forcing and the CO2 concentration, most of us think about climate stuff in the CO2, if we can just get back to less than 1.5, degrees and whatnot. But that's really not the full picture. And even if we were to, have carbon capture or some technology that did something like that, other than trees, which already do carbon capture, that all of these other problems would persist. I think I'm not sure about radiative forcing, if that's related to greenhouse effect of keeping the temperature in or something. The biosphere integrity, I know genetic integrity had to do with how many species have gone extinct and how that has accelerated. And the functional has something to do with, the planet being able to sustain our lives. Humans are animals as well. Land change system has to do with agricultural use and how like trees being cut down in the Amazon for beef production and things like that, that it's affecting the way that the land can take care of itself. This is broken into green water and blue water in terms of freshwater use, and but I don't know much more about that. And the biochemical flows have some, like on the planet, in the Atlantic Ocean, there's a conveyor belt that moves the cold water from the melting glaciers and the circulation of that. And that is at risk or has already passed, but there's a risk of that stopping, and then we might have like an ice age in the Europe kind of thing.
Yeah.
But you know, all of these kind of cascading effects from that, and it's broken into two, but I don't remember which one is related to that or not.
I think that's phosphorus and nitrogen.
Thank you. Okay, so maybe I have these backwards. I think this is actually the conveyor belt one. And this is phosphorus and nitrogen, and that has to do with agricultural practices and our waterways, including like Green Bay has a bunch of, in Wisconsin, this part has a lot of agricultural flows that are affecting the nutrients and fish populations and stuff like that. And Dylan just talked about ocean acidification. It was just this past month that that they announced that we've officially passed that. But the good news is that like 20, 30 years ago, when we talked about the ozone layer,
Yeah.
and like we have to fix the hole in the ozone layer, then we stopped using chlorofluorocarbons or something happened. And we came back within the threshold. So
Yeah.
it's possible that human affected climate change can be reversed, but of course we have to figure out the political will or the mechanisms for that to happen.
Yeah, that was a great explanation.
Well, it was a good team effort, because
Yeah.
I all things the wrong things.
Alright, so the next one I have here is kind of starting to look forward to the future too, because I think the degrowth makes us ask some of those questions as well. So so even in this tense moment, it feels like the only thing politicians can agree on is that we need to be growing this machine at all costs. And that's kind of a deeply frustrating thing, because what GDP actually measures is pretty narrow and doesn't really benefit us to the extent that we think that it does. So GDP is really just a sum of consumption, government spending, business investments, and net exports. It doesn't track well-being at all. The person who developed the GDP indicator actually like gave us a warning in this regard, where he developed it during World War II as kind of a like macro indicator to track what the country was able to produce in wartime, to kind of assist with that overarching war effort. But he warned like this is not a good way to track the well-being or the progress of a country, but we decided to use it that way anyway, and kind of continue this process of kind of finding ways to optimize growth instead of optimize happiness. So yeah, I guess, can people read the things in this okay? So yeah, take a few seconds to kind of look at it a little bit, and if people see things that kind of jump out at them and kind of want to talk about them more, that would be amazing. But just kind of thinking about the question, like what should we be measuring? Like what actually kind of makes people happy? What's most important?
The last two brackets to the left, I think, are the tenets of individual happiness and community happiness. And then next to that is economic well-being. I understand that maybe other people think it goes the other way. But I think if these they're core values for, I would say, almost everyone living in our country and probably all over the world. I don't know, I feel like they need to be met before the ones on the left, like I think we need to think left to right. And as in, what is the GDP health, or what is like the health of our nation, what is the health of our citizens, what is the health of our city? I think those have, they are bigger ovals, but I think if you put them together, everything, so, you know, that's the encompassing values that will highlight even the smaller.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's an opportunity to kind of present degrowth as the common sense. So I like what you said about like these are kind of like almost like universal values. People would
Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
right, like these are things that a society should be building towards. So if we can kind of prove like like our current setup is only pushing us towards growth and it's not considering these other sort of indicators, that could be kind of like a good in for convincing people of this sort of thought.
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Well, I think it was in Jason Nichols' book, about the happiness link between perception of equity. And that countries that have the highest happiness indexes have the highest perceived equity.
Yeah.
Whereas like in the US, equity, in tandem with financial inequality, happiness has gone down steadily since the 1950s. So, I guess I was thinking about like the inequality being in living conditions, but it's really linked to happiness also.
Yeah, I think Jason Nicholas a line in that chapter too, where he says something about the US has successfully decoupled growth and happiness.
Yeah.
Couple hands up to that.
Yeah, I just think that the element in the room here is capitalism. And, this, I don't know who said it, but it's something that people quote at the time, it's easy to imagine the end of the world, the name of capital. And so there's such a story that we are trapped in around capitalism and consumption and the economy and GDP. It's hard to imagine what something else we want. And so that doesn't appear on this bill. I think it's the kind of the underlying story that we're living, and it's a made up story.
Right.
I also heard the other day something that just really struck me. There's someone in New York, I forget who it was, that says that people who are, the oligarchs, the billionaires, who are their foundational understanding is that democracy threatens capitalism. So the fact that the administration is threatening democracy.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up this one, because I intentionally did not include the word capitalism in this presentation. I think degrowth is an inherently anti-capitalist movement. It kind of, the argument of degrowth is that, I think it has the opportunity to work well in an American context, because what kind of like socialist or communist movements do is that they kind of pick and prod at this entire system and they say like, here are all the things that are wrong with the system. But degrowth kind of narrows its focus and it says like, here is the aspect of capitalism that makes it unique from any other economic system that has perceived it, which is its tendency to grow at all costs, production for the sake of production. The idea that is what makes capitalism unique, and it attacks that aspect of it without saying the word capitalism, which I think is useful in a US context because we've been taught for like the past 50 years that socialism and communism are swear words. So it's an in to kind of challenge these systems and kind of conventions.
I could just add, I think, there's myths that be brought up around what is socialism or capitalism, and we don't get any of those terms. It really don't. It shouldn't be this opposition between these different made up systems. It's how can we really imagine a future that's really different, where happiness, well-being, and health, and the health of the planet are really the foundation. And I think it's hard for people to understand what that looks like.
Yeah, beautifully done. With this.
Yeah, I just reread from I believe it's the 90s, Ryan Eisler, Jackson Blade, and the framework that makes the most sense with what we're talking about is the dominator mentality versus a partnership mentality, and it just, to me, that simplifies everything. When you're in partnership with nature, your fellow humans, all of that, you're really working towards a common good that supports what you were talking about with all extra resources for creativity and social space and the things that lead to happiness. So having the ability to make choices from a young age about the things that you do that bring you happiness, that, you know, you bring your skill set to the group and have that supported, I feel like that's one of the key points to fostering happiness.
Yeah, beautifully put. I think that's my definition of what freedom is. It's this ability to shape our own destinies. And as much as we talk about freedom in America, I don't think that we really have that here. If you have enough money, then you have the freedom to consume, but it's pretty much.
Yeah, you're applauded the game.
All right, awesome. Great insights.
May-
guys.
may-
Oh,
may I
yes,
say
absolutely.
too, earlier you used the term of like, it's almost common sense and that we would want the things on in the blue area. And I have been talking about permaculture for a long time, and Brandis and I took the permaculture design course in the design school for regenerating earth, and so it's not top of mind, and I've been thinking of myself as a permaculture storyteller. And part of the things that I say about the permaculture stories is that they feel like they're common sense. The three core values, and again, getting in touch with what are the core values that we're working towards. The core values from permaculture, and if you don't know, permaculture is gleaned from traditional cultures around the world that have sustained themselves, without just the overconsumption and domination, as Lynn just brought up. The three core values are earth care, people care, and fair share. So like baked right into it is the idea of kind of the democratic processes, the caring for each other and caring for the planet, as your great grandfather talked about. And that the 12 principles are things like produce no waste and obtain a yield, and observe and interact, things that are like, well, yeah, if you're going to build a garden, you have to notice what's going on and pay attention to what the sunlight is like and the water conditions and how water flows, and the getting back to common sense, and finding a way to talk about things that are like, oh yeah, that makes a lot more sense. That gives me some hope.
Yeah. I think when you mention these things to people, like over the past year, I've been talking to people about DeGrowth. There's a lot of like, oh, that makes perfect sense. And then the question is like, how do we get there?
Yeah.
So I think it's learning how to kind of answer that question, which we'll try and tackle a little bit in the latter half of the presentation. All right. Okay. I am going to try my best to talk about this slide here. So this is Herman Daly's and Joshua Farley's ends means spectrum from their textbook on ecological economics. I think it's a useful diagram for thinking about what the purpose of an economy is. Broadly speaking, they would argue the purpose of an economy is finding a way to use our resources in a way that serves a purpose. The idea is that our lives have some sort of purpose or greater meaning that governs how we choose to interact with our environment. So working top to bottom, we have the ultimate end, which is we can think of as like our ultimate kind of purpose for being here, the thing that our economy is sort of building towards. And then on the left of that chart, we can see that the fields of human study that deal with this are religion and ethics, and trying to figure out what our purpose is. And then below that, kind of, the other important thing about the ultimate end is that we don't know what it is. We're kind of constantly in pursuit of it, trying to figure out what's wrong and right. And then from that comes our intermediate ends. So if our ultimate end is something noble, then our intermediate ends will also be something noble. So those could be things like health or education or healthcare or comfort pursuing those as kind of intermediate ends. So coming up from the bottom now, that's our ultimate means. So they say low entropy matter energy, which basically just means like sunlight and raw materials that we can convert into things that are useful for us. So using technology and labor, we can, and using our knowledge of physics and understanding how the world works, we can turn those things, turn those resources into things that are useful for us, and in the process of political economy, use them to kind of figure out how to distribute those resources in a way that serves our intermediate and ultimate end. Does that logic kind of make sense to people? I know that that's kind of
Can you talk about political economy?
so. Political economy is the kind of like a cross-disciplinary field of political science and economics. So economics being like how do we kind of fairly distribute resources, and then politics being like how do we govern our institutions and kind of decide what to build or how to build it, or who builds it, I guess.
Isn't it wild though, like thinking about that, like that is the largest constructor of our reality, is the political economy. And like how fucked up that is. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. Did people have questions on this? Yeah, I was kind of 50-50 on putting this one in here, but I'll kind of explain further. So it can be argued that under our current system, the ultimate end is growth. So since the ultimate end dictates the ordering of our intermediate ends, we can see things like health, education, and comfort are not prioritized for the vast majority of the population. So we can see what goes awry when our ultimate end is something that's selfish and we're is kind of the idea I'm trying to enact here.
And I'm trying to make sense of like, you know, the means justify the ends, and I'm guessing that like some of these intermediate means where like, well, I have to work, I have to, you know, have this job, I have to have this income, blah, 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 but they may not even be related to whether or not you're having comfort or health or you know, that your intermediate ends being met. I'm trying.
Well, they should be related because this is like we have our understanding of the Earth system that we get from physics, and then we have kind of how like the things that we choose to extract from. So we can choose to do that in a regenerative way, and when we choose to do that in a regenerative way, then that changes the kinds of careers that people are doing. Maybe like the idea of a career is bunk in the first place, but like, you know, like your farmer does something different in a system that has a noble value than it does under a current system, where it's not covered by noble values.
Like the commodity soy or something like that, you know, like you'd be motivated to grow soybeans because there are incentives to do that, but it isn't necessarily leading to a food system that's even for human food. I'm trying to make things fit. Sorry.
Yeah. So I think like the idea is that we should be or part of the idea is that we have to be connecting our labor to things that are meaningful, because like when the incentive is growth, then your work doesn't feel very meaningful. If your incentive is something awesome, then if you feel like you're contributing to something, then those intermediate needs feel wonderful. Yeah, so I really like this character. You're about to say something?
I was almost gonna say, like, I think religion should be replaced with meaning, like,
Yeah.
I mean, because it's just, I think.
It's not
religion is-
everyone's.
Right.
Yeah, this sex book is from the 70s. So like that's kind of the perspective they're coming from. there's definitely been like lots of evolution in kind of the way that we talk about ecology as it relates to economics. So I just use the word resources a lot. A lot of people don't like using the word resources to talk about their to put like the
Humanize it.
right exactly.
It's a relation, it's relative.
Right.
Right. So there are ways that we can rethink this, but I think it kind of nicely tells the story of if we can make our goal something other than growth, then the benefits could really reverberate throughout the economy. And for me, this is the cool thing about growth, because as we kind of talked about leading up to this point, there's lots of evidence that proves that our current system is harmful and unsustainable for the future, but it also makes us question what we want to be building towards in the first place, right? And if we're not growing, then what are we doing? Which is, I think, a really important question. With that, we'll kind of transition to the halfway point here, and taking a few minutes to discuss what progress is, or kind of thinking about the things that we should be building towards, the things that we should be valuing. So maybe go ahead and turn back to your small groups and have that.
Okay.
Alrighty. Yeah, sorry to cut you guys a little bit short on the discussion there, but we're about halfway through, so we just want to make sure that we have our time to kind of get through everything and give you guys some time for discussion. So what did the groups come up with? What's progress? What did you talk about?
We were like, maybe this isn't the right question. It
Okay,
was like
yeah.
an inherently growthy word, so we kind of were asking, what is satisfaction or what is sufficiency, like, or also are we asking enough questions as a species of ourselves and of our relationships?
Yeah, so with this question is my bias towards Herman Daly's textbook, where he talks about the idea of redefining progress and not thinking of it in material terms anymore, and instead defining progress by kind of improvements in well-being instead. So, but yeah, I think progress maybe we associate with a future that looks more like this, right? So could be the wrong word.
And I feel like we did discuss that. I was probably talking too much, but I was like, if all communities have what they needed, that's progress. I mean, I drive through the city, not everybody that has what they need by any stretch of the need. So, you know, it doesn't have to look like this, but what if it looked like, oh, I can catch the bus and then see it where I need to go, and you know, take you to a job center, or I'll take a class for free through the rec department that's going to teach me on ways to preserve my own food that are like culturally appropriate for who I am. And then like, how do I help my neighbor do this as well? Like being closer with your neighbors, but also like tenants' rights and, you know, just the standard of living that so many people in the city are not experiencing. So that's what progress looks like. It's just like everyone's living, not in something lavish, but they're living, you know, with their needs. That's progress.
Yeah, thank you for tying it to the local context too.
So I think about
Yeah. And other people have interesting things that they talked about.
I think I might want to say, I didn't talk about this necessarily, but this idea of progress. As somebody who thinks about climate change and adaptation and resiliency, we have sort of two metrics that we're looking at. Is like the sort of chronic stressors that people do and don't have the capacity to deal with on an everyday scale. You know, food insufficiency, housing insufficiency, medical support and insufficiency. But then what we also are facing coming up, increasingly see this in coastal areas with drought in the Midwest, storms, is these like acute disruptions in quality of life and daily living. So I think for me, progress really means capacity to deal with both the chronic insufficiencies and then the acute disruptions that are our way increasingly year by year. And so that means having good communication systems and community support networks where we can, descale, do growth of like overarching, national, no King's March sort of style things, and having more local coalitions to help build capacity for these kinds of disruptions. So for me, that's what progress means, the capacity to deal with the chronic and acute insufficiencies that people will be facing increasingly.
Sounds like all mutual aid to me.
Yeah, and so. Because sometimes these kinds of conversations can get too high level and we're all in clouds and like, hey, should not make it fun, it's gonna be great. But what is that? What kind of work can we actually be doing to root progress, like progressive growth and progressive capacity?
Yeah, I love that.
Not be a hot take, but that's what progress means.
No, I don't think that's a hot take at all. I think, yeah, our ability to kind of deal with crisis or just standard problems that you would come across in a society. Like if we're not able to do that in our current form, then it would certainly be progress to be able to deal with it in the future. All right. How about the group in the back?
I think we also critique product word. We said it was really tied to, the one slide you had about the core of the periphery progresses for a subset of the board, or was that the expense? The way it's moved up.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. All right, anyone else have any insights they want to share before we kind of get to the latter half of things? All right. Okay, so for the rest of this presentation, I would be kind of stealing from a couple of different places. So the first 3 points, the planet fields relationships and anti-imperialism. I'm going to be basically rehashing chapters from Max Ailes' The People's Green New Deal. And then in the fourth part, that's going to be rehashing a little bit of a chapter from The Future is DeGrowth by Schmelzer et al. We're first going to talk about agriculture and the vision for agriculture as kind of in a People's Green New Deal, how our relationships can change, so the different policies and urban planning and justice strategies that we can be pursuing to change our environment and promote more social harmony, and then talking about really the importance of anti-imperialism in all of this, and how sovereignty and reparations are a crucial part of progress, or progress, not the right word, but an important part of this mission that is not talked about. And then we'll kind of close out talking about how to change the world. So that's kind of the like obviously we can only go over that in the broadest possible sense, but I'm going to give kind of a framework for how systemic change can happen and how different forces can interact. And then I'll ask you guys to think about how you can be applying that to your own local context. And then here we're trying to imagine visions of the future. So there's an author named Rob Hopkins who has a quote I really like where he talks about how we need to fill the cupboards of our imaginations with visions from the future. And I love that sort of idea, this idea that we need to be learning to fall in love with our future and not always be thinking into despair about it. So, first part, Planet of Fields. This is the name of a chapter from A People's Green New Deal. I forgot to put the slide over there. Okay. Oh, sorry guys. Okay, so the way that we feed ourselves is essential to any climate strategy, but as we were kind of talking about earlier, real solutions are not in the political mainstream. The point that he kind of highlights here is that the drawdown project outlines kind of all these different pathways for us to be able to start putting carbon back into the earth and get to sustainable planetary levels. And the vast majority of those plans include the total transformation of our agricultural system. So it's something that when we look at the science, it's kind of a common sense, yet people don't consider it common sense because it's not talked about enough. We're not divisioning it, right? I think people probably already know a decent amount about the dangers of monoculture. It's probably worth mentioning that the UN said that like our current practices of degradation will likely leave us out of topsoil in the next 50 years, which is kind of scary to think about. And that we are, like really shooting ourselves in the foot there. There is a massive drawdown potential to these sorts of solutions. A fun fact about me, I went to Brazil a little bit over a year ago to study syntropic agroforestry, and just for like a bump, and I took a class there, and we learned about how we can kind of farm to replicate what ecosystems do for an environment. And one of the teachers, one thing that he said to me that really stuck with me was that he said the best thing that you can do for the climate is to build a successful agroforestry system because they just put so much carbon into the ground. And he said the second best thing you can do for the climate is to make a failed agroforestry system. So what he means by that is traditional conservation efforts often often consist of like a government agency coming in and just planting a bunch of trees and not considering how they interact with the rest of the plants. But in an agroforestry system, you are deeply considering like how does the coconut tree interact with the banana or the pineapple or like whatever you're growing. So you're growing it in a specific way and in a way that is more likely to thrive. So when you're considering those sorts of relationships, you're going to end up with richer soil. It really just shows that there is kind of a great opportunity to achieve drawdown with these sorts of systems. And he cites a statistic in his book that say that the high-end studies show that that a total transformation of our system could lead to even negative emissions on high-end estimates. So it's a real opportunity.
And can I jump in with some more?
Yes.
Because we're going to go to the next topic after this.
There's still more.
There's more stuff. Okay. Well, I was just going to throw in a couple of things in terms of syntropic agroforestry. Syn meaning together, like growing together. That every season the soil is getting richer. That's it's beautiful. A couple of things in the Wisconsin context in terms of conservation. There is a new badger land biodiversity credits or legal tender for land tenders that is that we're announcing next week. That is related to helping farmers in the state of Wisconsin put sections of their property or areas of their property, possibly marginal areas of where they may be growing things into conservation methods and getting paid to do that. And we found a way to make sure that in the urban context, in the city of Milwaukee, in the city of Madison, that people can apply for these credits as well. So I'm going to have more information about that soon. And just in terms of Indigenous leadership, I mean, this is permaculture. This is the way that people have been growing food, and we just are going back to that. And we're listening to people who still remember the traditionals.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of one of the most important aspects, which I'm actually happy to see even more mainstream environmentalists kind of come to realize. So I think that there really is kind of like an inherent truth to like, there's been a preservation of this wisdom and resistance to genocide in much of the world. And that knowledge still be used to heal our relationship with Earth. So talking about conservation versus agriculture, I think that that's like often a debate in the sustainability space that we don't need to be having. Whereas I was kind of like talking about the example in Brazil, you can be doing both at the same time. Conservation can be agriculture. Shifting labor, you mentioned kind of an interesting statistic in the book where in 1940, like 40% of the somewhere between 20 and 40% of the US population were farmers. And now it's like less than 6%, you know. Okay, I was gonna say like around 3%. So
I could be wrong.
yeah. So not very many people are farmers anymore. So agriculture systems are more efficient in terms of what they're able to produce, like total output on the land. But they're of course less efficient in terms of labor, which is why they thrive in kind of a capitalist system. So one hard question that we need to ask ourselves is, should more of us be farmers? Should we be doing more to incentivize that kind of labor so those become good jobs? Is there a way to make that kind of transition work?
Can I just share something about that?
Yeah, of course.
I've just been seeing a lot of these farm hotels and farm clubs and like farm as well-being tourism popping up. It is really being sought. So it's interesting because I think that's a great point. Maybe we should all be farmers.
Yeah, and I think that there are like absolutely like not everyone has to be a farmer. This like really scares people when you bring up a point like this. So if you're trying to like get someone onto DeGrowth, I wouldn't bring this up. That's an idea, but I do think it's something worth thinking about for sure. This as several groups have kind of alluded to, having kind of a democratic bottom-up planning is really important. So going to more of these localized solutions is really important, not just because it's better to live that way, but also just because it will work better. This is like really hyper local knowledge to specific regions. And if you ask like a state or national government to manage that or tell someone to plant a certain thing in a certain place, it just wouldn't work. So you need to be able to have local organization of our agriculture all across the country. And just talking briefly about energy flows too. So our current system of food production takes the energy from the sun that hits the earth, that turns it into plants. We eat the plants, or no, the plants go on a truck, which is powered by fossil fuels, which goes to a store, which we drive to, and then we buy food from that store. Then we put it on our plate, and then we don't eat all of it, or we waste it, and then it goes into the landfill. And then all of that methane is released into the air. The much more efficient thing to do is have farms much closer to us. So I don't know what it is in Wisconsin, but in Illinois, 97% of the food that we produce, 97% of the food that we eat is imported from out of state. So all that land is dedicated to farmland, but we're like literally not eating into it. We literally not eating it. So we make these energy flows a lot more efficient when we bring farms closer to us. And instead of kind of this pipeline of sunlight to landfill, we do this pipeline of sunlight back into the earth, where those nutrients return to the soil and kind of serve as a fertilizer. Anything else to add on?
Yeah, I wanted to say something about the democratic bottom-up planning, and there the concepts of pro-social, the Eleanor Ostrom's ideas about, I don't know, I don't have it really well under my, in my mouth right now, but one of the things that we've already referenced is like the ability of self-determination or autopoiesis, being able to create our own realities. And when you have like political systems that don't allow for self-determination and sovereignty, and I know sovereignty is another topic that you're going to talk about, but that's one of the 8 criteria, is that a community can actually enact their democratically arrived at decisions and planning. And I might just add that in. Oh, and one other thing I was thinking about in terms of shifting labor is and like agritourism and woofing, and being able to go somewhere cool and work on a syntropic, as you did for a month, and earlier this year I got to go to Colombia and see syntropic agroforestry and this kind of thing going on. That the nature,
picture is from Cuba, by the way.
lovely, lovely. The nature of disruption and people being displaced and people losing their housing or their employment and having the opportunity to go to other places and work temporarily and have a living situation. I'm thinking that might become more normalized, and the class of people who can afford to go on agritourism, can fly to another continent. We have to kind of build all of that into our way of thinking about regenerative recreation and travel. And I do know that there's also, I want to talk more with Marley about regenerative tourism, because there's a whole, part of bioregionalism and local and that comes up for me too.
Awesome. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is relationships. So changing our environment to promote social harmony. And the idea of better community design can lead to improved relationships with the earth and with each other. I will kind of, he points out a bunch of different things that we could be doing that we're not doing. In our current system, the surplus that a company produces does not go to the worker, it just goes to the company. So CEO can continue to enrich himself, right? ILO proposes a worker-owned surplus. The idea being that workers are much less likely to overproduce. They're not going to produce more than what's needed if they don't have to. The next bullet is kind of like I would say the 3 pillars of kind of degrowth transition policy of job guarantees, minimum incomes, and working hour reductions. So talking first about job guarantees, I think this is really the most important one because it's a policy that will allow us to organize unions again. So kind of the way that the political landscape has been changing over the past few decades, like unions have just been gutted, and the government has been very successful in creating the message that if you don't have growth, then you're going to lose your job. And if you have environmental regulation or any regulation at all, then that is going to stifle growth and you're going to lose your job. So that creates this tension between environmental movements and labor movements. The job guarantee is an opportunity to kind of bridge that gap. So it gives unions the opportunity to work together, not with without just the sole focus of protecting their own jobs, but also it allows them to do what a union is for, using the power of their labor to protect the interests of their community, right? So the job guarantee gives them an extra layer of leverage where if there's not growth to support a specific career, then they can find meaningful work elsewhere that is provided by the government. So that could be like working in restoration, for example. Minimum incomes, that's also important. So that's just giving people enough so that their basic needs are met. And then working hour reductions, just giving ourselves more time is something that's really important. Like we have the technology to be able to work less, so we should be working less. And when we work less, we organize better, and we can kind of build these networks of resilience that we need to combat climate change. Healthcare is another thing that would shift massively in a degrowth world where kind of I mean, I won't talk too much about this. We know that we have this insane system in the United States where it just like looks out for the profit over people. We would transition to a system that is more preventative in nature, which I think is something that like the logic of the US healthcare system kind of struggles to grapple with, where you have so many people who are scared to go to the doctor until they absolutely have to, because it's so goddamn expensive. They just like hope that everything is okay. But in a system that's more preventative, people don't necessarily have that fear. They're more likely to go in and talk to someone if they're feeling something. Feminism. So this is where we talk about kind of reconsidering how we value work traditionally done by women, kind of across the world, where like raising children or taking care of older folks, a lot of this care work is done unpaid by women. So capitalist economy takes advantage of this and expects it to kind of be done for free. So it'll kind of suggests having kind of government welfare programs that pay people for this sort of work. It doesn't have to be women. Care work should be better distributed anyway, but someone who is raising a child on their own could be compensated for that in this sort of system. A better urban planning. There's a lot that goes into this, but what I love from this chapter is that he talks about smoothing an urban and rural divide. So the idea being that urban and rural culture are very distinct, I think, especially in the United States. And the big reason for that is because of the way we design our infrastructure, or design rural communities to be super spread out. We don't build cultural institutions like museums or good schools or hospitals and those sorts of areas that are missing kind of their pillar institutions. So if we have an opportunity to kind of build those places up, make them a little bit more urban, but also make our cities feel a little bit more rural too, and take the opportunity to use them to kind of like plant more stuff, integrate vertical agriculture. An idea that I like that he has is implementing kind of like a permeable pavement that allows for better water flows throughout the city. So thinking about like where our water goes and how it's all of that. So there's a lot that goes into it, but the idea being kind of urban areas can get a little bit more rural, and rural areas can get a little bit more urban, and they can be connected by a system of transportation that connects them culturally. And then reparations is something that he pretty much talks about this in every chapter, just kind of really driving it home. But here he talks about it in the context of planning for the future, where like reparations to Black people in this country could be in the form of homes built in this kind of like new urban planning model. And then the last point I'll talk about in this chapter is localized material use, which I think is really interesting, because this is where he talks about kind of breaking this core periphery dynamic, where we depend on the periphery for a lot of our like heavy metals, our steels, or all of that sort of thing. And we have the ability to build with local materials, so more lumber that we can be getting in our own backyard. And he argues that what happens when we decentralize these sorts of systems is that our communities become more beautiful, because when the materials that we're producing aren't just from like some factory where they're making the same piece a million times, he argues that this would turn into return to something like carpentry, where you get more flair in the way that people are building their homes or building public works of art. So you get a flourishing of arts from this sort of policy and connection. And then, yeah.
Wow, I mean, there's a lot there, all of those, but something that's coming up for me is that in the language of collapse, if we're thinking about how we've already crossed some of these 7 of the 9 thresholds, and we are facing realities of the laws of physics and things about the way that we're presently in a drought in much of the United States, and the data that is on drought.gov was last updated at the end of September, and it was something like 37% of the United States is experiencing drought. It also says at the top of that website, this data will not be updated. So we will, and perhaps the EPA has been disassembled, and we will not have ways of really knowing how bad things are. Someone already, a couple of people referenced driving across the Midwest. I was driving across Ohio a little while ago, and they are experiencing profound drought, 75%, 25% reduction in yields of their corn. All of those cornfields were, brown when I drove by. And so it is the new normal, and some of the projections are that broad swaths of North America will not be farmable. And so even the conversation about rural areas is kind of like, well, there will emerge islands of coherence in this chaos, and those islands of coherence might be around the Great Lakes because we have 21% of the world's fresh water. But cities themselves are inherently unsustainable, and concrete, Roman concrete, the building materials that we've used that use a lot of fossil fuels and high energy to produce, we will, when streets crack, we won't be able to repair them the ways that we may have, had in this little bubble of opportunity. And so we will be experiencing collapse in both of those kinds of, and it's probably it's a false binary to say that there's either rural or urban, because there's always going to be the margin between. And Sarah is like who did leave a few minutes ago, does stuff with the built environment and architecture and stuff like that. So it would also be interesting to hear other people's perspectives on this. But I've been really sitting with the idea of like planning for these kinds of futures, but it will probably be little pockets of places, and there may be broad areas that are really unlivable. Well, there are already places. I lived in Colorado for a few decades, and there are ghost towns in Colorado from the 1800s. But in the time that I was living there, there was another mountain town that ran out of water, and people moved away from that town because if you don't have any water in your well, it's a ghost town. And so it's not something that's happening in the future. It has been ongoing, but our awareness of it is uneven. And so I just wanted to kind of bring into the space that as you said, we have 50 some seasons of soil left, of growing seasons in the way that we're doing it. And in some parts of the world, it's already been degraded to the point where it's an abandoned asset, I guess is the main way people might talk about it. But not that it couldn't be regenerated, but to regenerate land at the landscape scale, which those of us who are talking about bioregioning in this room are thinking about, like, whoa, what would it be like to regenerate the Ogallala Aquifer, or to regenerate the Northern Andes, or like continent level scales. And I'm just trying to focus on Milwaukee and the Great Lakes region here, but those are some of the things that come up for me too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for kind of the grounding and kind of thinking about like a lot of the places that we have buildings in now, or we have cities now. We may not be able to live there in the future too, just because that's our new reality. That's what sustained warming would promise. And then a little bit of food for thought to add to that. I don't remember what this book is called or even who wrote it. But someone did a study basically asking like if humans stopped like maintaining the infrastructure of our cities, how fast would they crumble? They found that skyscrapers crumble within like 100 years. Just like without that kind of constant maintenance. So it's kind of crazy to think about. Like there's insane material infrastructure that goes into building a skyscraper. And in this chapter, Isle even talks about like literally dismantling skyscrapers and recycling parts. That's been extreme, which I thought was really interesting. Okay. I'm gonna try and I hate to like rush through anti-imperialism because that's obviously really important. But yeah, talking about climate justice via reparations. So the true solutions require that the global north take accountability for centuries of plunder. So that means paying not only climate debt, but also debt from colonization and through centuries of imperialism. But climate debt, the idea being like the rich countries that cause climate change largely at the expense of our countries, and we owe them like literal money that's in expertise to be able to rebuild their infrastructure and make it work. So demilitarization is a really important one as well. Iowa in here argues that we should literally just get rid of the military. And he also says that there's an opportunity there too, where the military has an incredible industrial infrastructure that could be used to build things for a regenerative transition, right? So you could use military infrastructure to build solar panels or windmills, just like these massive manufacturing spaces, which I thought was a really kind of creative use of infrastructure that we don't. It's interesting logic. Sovereignty, so both kind of like within this land and outside of it. There's obviously like settler colonialism, which we used in this country and also all of these other countries. Giving sovereignty to those places with the idea of where we have traditionally denied their right to history, right to control over historical processes, general control over social and economic life.
And if I could say one quick thing,
Yes.
Sturgeon Fest was a couple weeks ago, and Jenny and I got to release sturgeon into the and if you don't know about the indigenous-led sturgeon habitat restoration process, it is one of the very beautiful stories of Milwaukee, and the sovereignty of being able to control your own food sources and cultural sources are, also part of the conversations happening with like the African American Roundtable here on the northwest side of Milwaukee, figuring out for themselves what do we want to do to have food sovereignty? What kinds of things how will we know when we've arrived at food sovereignty?
Okay. And then yeah, thank you guys for bearing with me trying to get I just have a couple more slides. So thinking about changing the world, I think is important to remember that this opportunity in crisis. So right now we have a human rights crisis for immigrants in this country. So by looking out for our neighbors, we can rebuild communities with strong networks of mutual aid, a crucial step that needs to happen to resist fascism and be more resilient in the face of coming climate impacts. It's also an opportunity for learning. We can come to understand how mass immigration is caused by U.S. imperialism and use that knowledge to advocate for sovereignty and reparations. So this is kind of in every breaking point, there's an opportunity to get at the real root cause and kind of spread that message. That's really important. And then talking about standing up abroad as well. So we can also fight as activists for Palestine. So the core relies on the periphery for materials, and we are starting to see inevitable breaking points in that relationship. Palestine is an example of such a breaking point. The U.S. depends on a strong Israel to maintain military access to the Middle East, allowing them to protect their interests in the region. Israel is a key part of the U.S.'s strategy to keep the region unstable and maintain cheap access to resources. And when breaking points like this occur, it's important to advocate for the sovereignty of the people being exploited. There's an opportunity to shift consciousness in a country that has long turned a blind eye to where its privilege comes from. Okay, and then this is kind of the last slide where if people want to stick around a few minutes after. Oh, I changed it for myself. Okay. Yeah, this will be the last kind of slide, and then if people wanted to stick around for a few minutes after, feel free to kind of chat a little bit, but I'll invite some conversation after I talk about this. The idea being that to achieve systemic change, we need to figure out how technological change, social movements, political systems, and the economy can kind of move together in a direction that is favorable for humanity, which is obviously a gargantuan task. I really like the framework presented in this chapter because it helps us imagine how that happened. So they break down kind of 3 key elements of systemic change that might happen in the transition of an economic system. So it might be from feudalism to capitalism. There may have been some of these cultural things going on. So the first kind of change that they point out in this chapter is interstitial. So that is experimental change in our everyday lives and communities. Symbiotic change says change within existing institutions to empower interstitial changes. So we can see how these two are interrelated. But symbiotic change is not possible without counter-hegemonic change, which is change to challenge the legitimacy of existing institutions, shifting opinions in a way that makes symbiotic change possible. So when we think about our actions and what we're doing and the impact that we're causing, and the impact that they're causing, we can think about the different tools that these different kind of frameworks of change imply. So interstitial change, that could be community agriculture, alternative eating, alternative media, urban gardens, alternative schooling, collective kitchens, that sort of thing. Symbiotic change could be some of those policies that we talked about earlier. So reduced working hours, redistribution of wealth, like a universal basic income, and tax reform. And then counter-hegemonic, that's maybe a little bit more combative. That's really getting to the core of why capitalism is able to sustain itself in this country, or in the world, because it has control over these ideas. So it's finding opportunities in the media. Maybe we are having seminars where we're talking about DeGrowth. We're supporting radical candidates for office to get these ideas more into the consciousness. There's think tanks where you're thinking of ways to go viral, get into pop culture. So those are just a few ideas of ways that we can think about, I guess, our own actions, and then how we can try and apply different strategies of change to them. That kind of makes sense. Any questions on this framework? Does it make sense? Okay. So it is 12 o'clock. So people can feel free to step out. Those who would like to stick around, I invite to just like have a little discussion about kind of the things you're working on, and maybe how you could see them working, fitting into this kind of framework, or how you could be expanding upon them, or attaching them to other movements, or attaching them to each other. Asking yourselves, like, which levers of power am I pulling, and how can I connect with someone else who's pulling a different lever of power? All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We're involved in policy.